Previously on agentpalmer.com, Len Dayton's second Samson trilogy gets its hook in quickly. Entertainment listening, finding the balance between music and podcasts, and my conversation last episode with the Tolkien professor convinced me it's time to reread Tolkien again, so the reading list just got longer. This is the Palmer Files, episode 48 with Kate Wallinga, host of Ignorance Was Bliss, a podcast that has transformed over its lifetime into a show much like this one, full of people's stories. We talk about content, community, explore how our shows are made, and much, much more. Are you ready? Let's do the show. Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 48th episode is Kate Wallinga, host of Ignorance Was Bliss. What you are about to hear is an honest conversation between two content creators about community, authenticity, and so much more. We cover process, losing episodes, balancing, creating content with life, and also consider a few what-ifs. Before we get going, remember that if you want to discuss the episode as you listen or afterwards, you can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest Kate at IWB Podcast, that's IWB Podcast, and this show at the Palmer Files. IWB Podcast will also lead you to Kate's Instagram and Facebook pages. For all of the episodes, links, and additional information, you can also visit iwbpodcast.com. Email can be sent to this show at thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. And remember, your home for all things Agent Palmer is agentpalmer.com. So, let's lessen our ignorance with a few stories, shall we? Kate, you and I tweeted, that was our first introduction, about authenticity of personal branding. So I'm going to start with something simple. What is your personal brand?
Oh, you think that's simple, do you? Huh.
I do,
okay.
Actually.
Okay. Well, I mean, my elevator pitch is where that sort of starts from.
Okay.
And that is that I am a former forensic psychologist and crisis clinician. I'm home on disability now, and I collect stories. So I'm not a true crime podcaster. I used to be, and I went through recovery, and now I talk to whoever is willing to talk to me. And sometimes it is collecting stories about my guest, and sometimes it's about something out in the world.
So in regards to our initial conversation, authenticity, you are who you are? Is that, I mean, I heard a couple shows, and on Twitter, you seem to be just not trying to go for like because we all know, right? I think everybody on social media or in general that's a creator knows, like, I can write, I can refine this to try and be viral, or I can just be real.
I'm so impressively lazy with that. Like,
I don't think it's lazy. I want to give you credit because I don't think it's lazy.
Well, there are times where, it depends on the circumstance. So the more unfiltered it is, the more, not filtered, that's not the right word, but the more public it is,
okay,
without any barriers. So for instance, Twitter,
yeah,
I tend to be a little more careful in terms of, I don't share much about my family life. I don't share much about if I'm having a bad day, because Twitter, it's all ephemeral anyway. It's gone in a second. And yeah. I view Twitter as promotional.
Okay.
So I try to be very true to who I am. That being said, who I am is kind of a goofball a lot of the time. And I spend a lot of time climbing up on soapboxes and then realizing, how did I get up on this soapbox? This is strange. So that's my Twitter persona.
I don't think that. See, but that seems accurate to who I am. Like, I want the interaction. I enjoy Twitter for the back and forth that it used to be at one time. And I think at times it still is. But I also feel like I take the easy way out because, I don't know, the cliche from movies is like, if nothing else, tell the truth because it's the easiest to remember. Like, that's my persona as whether it's Agent Palmer or Jason. Like, it doesn't matter who it is. It's just so much easier to be like, this is what I think, so this is who I am, and not try to craft something for likes, I guess.
Well, for me, it's more about when I'm on Twitter, I have a number of health issues, see above, Ray being on disability, right? I don't tend to unload those a lot on Twitter. I don't tend to explain if I'm having a bad day. I tend to just ease back from Twitter and not. Whereas on my Facebook group, which is private, I let anybody in. It's just private so that I can be more unguarded.
Okay. I mean, that's fair. I mean, I treat them both equally. Like I wouldn't. In fairness, I'm pretty sure my mother's following me on every social network I'm on. So I always tweet or Facebook post or whatever as if my mother's watching. Now, look, she's not, okay? She's probably listening to this right now laughing because while she may be following me on all those platforms, she doesn't see half of what I post. But I presume that the one time I'm like, my mother will never see this, is the one time she's guaranteed to read it. So I always tweet as if she's there. But I wonder about authenticity because I've been, we'll say digital consultant, which sounds like a bunch of buzzwords, and it really is. But people will be like, hey, can you help me, launch X, Y, or Z? And I'm like, sure, this is what you have to do. And they go, it sounds so easy. How come you have all the blueprints? Like, you should write this, you should write that. I go, well, it's a game, to be sure. Like, it really is. Being a content creator, it's a game. But you can play a game different ways. And at the moment, I'm not playing to win. I'm playing to be me. I'm playing for the fun of it. I could easily audit my own blog and go, well, all of these blog titles need to be more clickbaity. All of them. Because I tell you, I liked this book. This is my review. That's the title. Not, you're never going to believe what this author wrote on page 75. Click to find out. Like, I know that will get me more views. I cannot in good conscience write that headline or that tweet for that matter.
I mean, to me, there's different things. I mean, for some people, that is their authenticity, right? Is to garner attention is what they authentically need. And so, fair enough. I don't structure myself that way. There's a meme that I've seen several times. People sent it to me because it reminds them of me. And it's something to the effect of, don't screw with a woman in her 40s. She's seen everything and she doesn't give a shit. And that is extraordinarily on brand. Like, I don't care what other people think of me. I would like to be liked because I'm human, but more importantly, I want to not be ashamed of what I've done or what I've said. And so to me, that's what authenticity is bringing whatever I really am. That being said, yes, it's all a game, and they're different playing board. Jesus Christ, words. Yeah, what I'm saying? Like,
there's different fields of
maps.
play.
Exactly. And so Twitter has a more promotional, public side to it. I can see who my followers are by Twitter name, but that doesn't mean I know who they are. There are some people in my extended family and my husband's extended family and so on that I would I would prefer not to share certain things with. So I'm more guarded on Twitter and I'm more promotional on Twitter. But that's still authentic. That's just fewer facets of me. On Facebook, I'm a lot more like, here you are, warts and all,
That's fair.
but that's why it's a private group, so that I can just say whatever. And I mean, my 21-year-old is one of my mods. And so the whole idea of like, be careful because your family's going to see it. Like my 21-year-old daughter is a mod and my grandmother's in the group. And once in a while she's like, you really had nice cleavage today. Like, thanks, Grandma. Thanks.
Yeah, I'm curious how this all shakes down. And when you talk about like a curated community, Facebook is obviously the most obvious, but I started a Discord not too long ago and I kept it curated for a while, but then it was like, I want to see what happens when this grows. So you have to be kind of trusting of the community you curate and go, all right, well, let me hope none of you brings the asshole to the party. There's going to eventually be one. There always is. But let's see how long we can go with you bring a friend and you bring a friend, and maybe it'll just all be friendly people. I don't know. We haven't found the asshole yet, thankfully. But I'm sure it will happen, right? And you know what? Maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the asshole. Like that's
possible.
That's definitely possible. Although I am very much, and it's weird. I'm not myself on the Discord, which bears my name, right? But I do try and I'm very much a museum curator there, trying to like start conversations, not necessarily as an instigator, which about 5 or 6 years ago in the heyday of Twitter DMs, like as that was the de facto communities, I was in some that were like maybe 20 people, 30 people. And there I was the instigator because I felt like it was fun and it wasn't my community. I was a part of the community. So I was like, well, this isn't mine. I can shake some shit up, man. Like, let's have some fun. Like, sir, I know you liked that movie, but I don't think it's that good. And then just wait, right? Like that. And you know what you're doing when you say those things. And whether it's in a private channel or it's public, you know what you're doing. Or at least I did. I feel like nobody trolls unknowingly, right? I think that's apparent. So I'm curious how it all shakes down. Do you feel any pressure for the promotional side of things? For like, I can't just share my link. I have to engage otherwise.
No, it's more that I feel pressure to self-promote. I feel awkward self-promoting. And so I have to remember to do that. I have to remember that's what this is for. And I release typically about 3 episodes a week.
Okay.
And so there's a certain degree where I'm like, I'm so sorry, but yep, here's another new episode. Here we go again, and another, and another. But that's what Twitter is for me.
Yeah.
I've never engaged deeply on Twitter. I'm in a couple of group chats, and that's fine. On Facebook, really the only reason I go to Facebook now is my own group. And there I'm definitely I feel less of that pressure now. For a long time, I've had a sense of pressure for starting conversations and making sure things moved and, dropping a prompt in the group
being
to try
the
to get,
host.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And that, and it's very clear that if I make a post as opposed to anybody else in the group, I have about 600 people in my Facebook group. And if anybody else in the group makes a post, they will get less engagement than I will.
Okay.
Just by the nature of being the host. And so there's also a little bit more of, there are people I actively dislike in my Facebook group. And I know that half a dozen people just checked their phone to figure out if it's them. The answer is, if we have ever exchanged texts, we're probably fine. But there are people that I don't like them. But I've made it a rule for myself that you and I may not be buddies, but as long as you behave appropriately in the group, you can stay in the group.
Yeah, I think that that's fair. Like,
but so it puts me in a different, like, I'm not among friends. Do you know what I mean? I'm among listeners, and I don't like the word fans. That feels off-putting. That feels disingenuous. I don't like that.
Yeah, fans feels like celebrity.
Yeah, I don't like that.
And
distancing.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, because I am a blogger, like, I'm a cross-platform, right? I'm a blogger, I'm a podcaster. I'm hoping that the people listening to this have at least checked out my site. I mean, I talk about it at the beginning of every episode. They're at least aware that I have one. People that only listen are aware it exists.
There are times in my Facebook group, which is titled Ignorance Was Bliss Asylum, meaning both where you might hang out if you're a little unhinged and also safe space.
Yeah.
Right? There are times where I'm like, you guys remember I have a podcast, right? Like, that's right. Because there's times where I'm like, we have gone so far off the rails because it's very me in a easily distracted, stupid humor, memes. Like, if I'm having a bad day, I don't want people to they're me. I want people to send me the most inappropriate memes they can find.
Okay. All right.
Like, that's my idea of how we cheer each other. But at the same time, if somebody steps in and says, I'm having a really bad day for real, like I just lost a family member, or, you know, whatever, something big bad happened, the group seems to know when to shut up and provide support. But like, one of my favorite recurring threads in my group is something called the anonymous reprimands, because I don't want necessarily to say, Jason, you did a thing.
Okay.
I want to make you nervous. I'm a mother of 4 children.
Yeah.
And I don't want them to fear me.
Okay.
But I want them to be nervous about making me unhappy.
So hold on. So we
have these anonymous reprimands. So like yesterday I started one, like, okay, I'm having a week because yesterday was a day and a half. And I was like, all right, it's time. Anonymous reprimands thread. And so the first one up there was like, you flounced out of this Discord server, which was not an airport, but you announced your departure anyway. And now you're asking me whether you're missed. And no, you're not missed. And also to the other person, your curiosity is not worth the abandonment of my moral compass.
Okay.
You know, things like that. And it's always worded vaguely enough that there are times where my husband will be like, look, I know you're not talking to me, but every time I read one of your anonymous reprimands, I stop and I think, like, could she maybe be talking to me? I'm like, excellent.
Yeah, you're trying to make sure that you can encompass all 4 kids without calling one out, because then the reciprocal damage will be that they'll all be a little bit better.
In theory, yeah. And just, I mean, but anybody, you know, it doesn't matter whether it's kids or friends or strangers on the internet or Tennessee or whatever. It's just, it's not as important to me to name names as it is to express a given frustration or irritation or whatever.
Time to get it out instead of letting it fester inside where.
And that is something I will do in my Facebook group without a whole lot of self-censorship or editing. Okay. I would never do that on Twitter.
No, that's fair. I mean, it's the community you've got, and while I see Twitter slightly differently than most, mainly because I've gotten lucky. Look, I hid behind Michael Caine for the first 8 years of my Twitter existence, right? Like, I was Agent Palmer at Agent Palmer with a picture of Michael Caine portraying Agent Palmer for the first 8 years I had that Twitter handle, right? Like, it wasn't until after I launched this podcast and my intro to the first episode was, I'm Jason Stershik, also known as Agent Palmer, that I changed my name on Twitter to be Jason Stershik, Agent Palmer, at Agent Palmer, and put my own face on my avatar. That was a first for me. And I wasn't hiding. Like the account, if you couldn't go like before and after, like nothing changed, right? My language is still the same. I like the same things. I hate the same things. I interact with the same people. It's all the same. But it was a bit like, this is the real me. I wasn't hiding, right? It's like having a mask of yourself on and taking it off and revealing yourself.
Still me.
You know,
Yeah.
like it's still me, right? Like, but
I never used Twitter before I had a podcast.
Okay.
Like I had a Twitter account that I just never used, and it still exists out there in the world, and I haven't posted on it in 3 years. So I've had my show for about 3.5 years. And, you know, I studied marketing some in college before I realized I hated it. And so I know about things like branding and like certain, you know, adding visuals, adding music, adding, you know, using a pinned tweet for a certain purpose and explaining what you are in a line and that kind of, like, I know how to build a Twitter profile.
Yeah.
And so my Twitter has always only been my logo. That's always, I haven't changed that. But I had never, before starting a podcast, I had never taken a selfie because I am old and get off my lawn. And
you don't have to look, I'm not that much younger than you. And I don't want to deal with a selfie.
Well, like, okay, but here's what happened is in my Facebook group, it was the first Christmas season of having started my show.
Okay.
And I was still more true crime than not at that point.
All right.
But still, there was a tendency to connect and a tendency to, I want to tell the why.
All right. Yeah.
You know, like I said, forensic psychologist. I'm not a journalist. I'm not about the narrative. I want to explain more about why and how things happen. And I was starting to get, you know, this was about 9 months to 8 months in to having created the Facebook group. And it was starting to get some of its own traction. People were starting to post on their own and interact more. And it was less daily effort to make it happen. And I was realizing, though, that there were a lot of people that were alone, that podcasts were their friends.
Sure. Yeah. 100%.
You know? And so it was whatever day of, you know, it was a Saturday. I know because somebody came up with Saturday selfies and I was like, that's really cute. And I hate cute, but okay. And that's what they're still called now. And every Saturday we run a selfie thread in my group, which I actually have to post on Friday nights because if I don't, then I wake up on Saturday morning with 7 different selfie thread posts. And I'm like, whoa, chaos. No, just one. And so I had to get used to taking selfies pretty quickly because I had taken one. I was blitzed. I mean, the selfie is me sitting on my kitchen floor with one of my kids in my lap. And I had been just snacking on Jell-O shots for hours is what I had been doing. And that is what I had to do in order to get myself in the mindset of taking a selfie because I was so uncomfortable with the concept. And I used to work as a photographer, but doing it myself with my own phone, I was like, this is weird, but people loved it.
But turning the camera on yourself is a different proposition. Like I've gone through some older photos of late and I'm not in a lot of photos. I take a lot of photos. I'm not in a lot of photos. And in college, I have a ton of photos of other people. I think maybe once or twice somebody took the camera and took a picture of me. There are a few pictures of me in my actual college yearbooks here and there, right? Other than that, like there's not really evidence outside of the diploma. And even then, you know, was I really there? Who knows? But like I'm very much more comfortable behind the camera than in front of it. And it doesn't matter if the front of it allows me to take a picture of myself. I don't wanna. Like,
no, and that's the thing is I'm better at it now. I'm more relaxed with it now. But what happened was I posted that first one and it got this huge amount of interaction.
Okay.
Of other people posting their selfies. And I early on, I used to go through and comment on every single one. Now it depends on how many there are and now one of my Patreon perks is a weekly drawing for who gets to choose the theme.
Okay.
For that week, and that kind of, like, it's become a thing. It's become this whole thing. And so sometimes I'm more engaged than others when it comes to the commenting, but just people, I don't think in my group specifically, it's not an Instagram style selfie. It's not duck lips. It's not made up. It's a lot of people who might be considered plain by magazine standards.
By Instagram standards, let's be real. Like, that's
right. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But it's real. It's genuine. And this is, they don't look like they took 12 different shots to get the right one. Like sometimes 2 or 3 maybe, and that's it. And let's go. That's all we're going with. And that has forced me. Now it's been 3 years of doing that. So that's like 150 some odd selfies that I've taken. That's weird. But there's a feeling of like, I like seeing my group members. I like seeing their faces and having that proof that there's somebody out there. I'm not just screaming into the void. And so it feels only fair.
Okay.
That I show myself.
Do you feel, ignoring the social media aspects, at least for the moment, when you're creating your show, do you not feel that is also screaming into the void a bit? I mean, obviously you have your own community, but aside from that, you're still putting this content out into the world for anybody. And like, the world doesn't shout back very often.
I get a fair amount of engagement.
Okay.
I mean, that's the true crime thing, is that true crime has a lot of listeners, a lot of engagement. I actually lost listeners when I left true crime, which is fine. It's not, I don't have anything against it.
Yeah.
I have things against it in conceptual ways, but it's more about, for me, it wasn't right for me to remain in this one community when there were so many other communities that I wanted to be a part of. I'm an organizer.
Okay.
I like to be connected. I also like to be behind the camera. And so it becomes this give and take of, I could be the entertainer who is screaming into the microphone, writing up the show notes on the website, posting in my group without giving a whole lot of myself behind it. I could do that. But one of the decisions that I made, part of my brand, to bring it back to that, is that I didn't want to be a therapist, and I didn't want to be a psychologist. And my specialty was in assessments, and I didn't want to do that for my show. I wanted to be able to explain it and talk about it.
Okay.
But if you're seeing a therapist, when you leave the therapy office, you really shouldn't know very much more about your therapist than you did when you walked in.
Okay.
Because it's not about the therapist, it's about you.
Yeah, I gotcha. I don't need to know that my physician got a C in, diagnostics for like, can he tell me I have the flu or not? I just need to know that he can do the tests and figure out, how to fix it.
Well, and beyond that, you don't need to know that he had a fight with his wife last night, or that they have 4 kids, or that they traveled to this place. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? And as well, the main reason that I am on disability is that I broke my back in 2014. Don't do that, by the way. Not fun.
All right.
I know. I understand. I just ruined your weekend plans, but I'm telling you.
It's going to go jump off a cliff without a parachute, and now I'm going to have to make new plans.
No, you have to come up with something. Well, I mean, you could still do it, but I'm telling you, it's not fun. I make it look fun and sexy, but it's not.
Okay.
But so I've been on disability since 2014, and there was a long time where I was in a very dark place mentally and had a hard time crawling out of that. And starting the podcast was kind of my way of feeling like I can use this knowledge that I have about how humans work and how the criminal justice system works and how the mental health system works. And why would somebody do this? Because there's a lot of times where people are like, I don't understand. And I'm like, how can you not understand? Yeah. And then I realized, like, they didn't go to school for as long as I did. Right. Cool. Cool. And so I could have created a very lecture-y, educational style show.
Okay.
And that felt like work that I wasn't getting paid for, and I didn't want to do that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I'm torn about, and it's not come up in a while, because amazingly, like, as I approach 50 episodes of this show, I still haven't run out of people, either people I know or people I don't, to invite on the show. But there's a part of me that the ever student, I guess is what I'll call it, that wants to learn things. That's like, I should really have like a professor come on and give me like a one-on-one lesson. And like, I can interact and that'll be the conversation. Except that that might be too formal, and that might be a different show, right? And so while my show, kind of like yours, anything goes, like we're not really pigeonholed to one type of guest or one topic, but I do feel there's it's not authenticity necessarily, but it's a feel, like an environment, this is laid back conversation. And while we may weave into serious topics, we may weave into hilarity at times, I may be a moron for 5 minutes, whatever, it's always going to stay mainly in its lane of, this is, I don't want to say low stakes, I feel like that's wrong, but it is just casual conversation.
Well, that's how I explain it to people when they come on my show, is that this is not an interview show. When I say to my husband, for instance, that I'm talking to somebody on a given night, it's, I'm recording at 8, not I have an interview at 8, because that helps me get in the mindset of, this is just a conversation. We're just hanging out and shooting the shit. And if somebody, like, I ask my guests to introduce themselves right up front so I don't forget. And that way they get the plug, because I think it's important that you plug your thing. I wouldn't have a show if my guests weren't coming on themselves, you know? And so it's important to me that they plug their thing. And it's important to me that I keep it more centered on the guest, but it's my show.
Yeah.
And so I tell personal stories. People who have listened for any amount of time know my children's names. They know the name of my ghost in my house. Like, I don't even believe in ghosts, but I have a ghost named Charlotte. That's who she is. And, just things like that. Like, for instance, Jesus Christ, for milestone episodes, certain number of downloads, I have an AMA.
Okay.
And it was every 100,000 downloads, and I'm spacing it out a little more coming up, because I'm tired of myself getting stupid, because my husband invented a drinking game. And I got extraordinarily inebriated for the second AMA that I recorded. And I never listened. I did publish it, but I was like, I am not listening to this. I'm going to do the very basic sound editing to make it listenable. And then I'm going to pretend this never happened. And that I succeeded. So that was 2 years ago, approximately 2.5 years ago. And it wasn't until about 6 months ago that somebody mentioned a thing, and I'm trying to figure out how to word this delicately, about my sex life that I had no memory of ever mentioning on mic at all. And you realized that I told that story several shots in, and everybody potentially knows that now. And a part of me was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to go back and edit that out of that episode. And then I was like, no, you know what? No, that's part of, that's me. That's why I was allowed to drive his truck. That's why, right there. And, and likewise, I've had some really heavy, hard stuff happen since starting my show. Yeah. My father died by suicide in 2019. And so I'd been doing my show just over a year at that point. And it took my feet out from under me. He lived with us at the time, although he didn't die in my home. And friends of mine, like I emailed conversations that I had backlogged to friends of mine, and they did the intro for me.
Okay.
So that I could just publish, so that the show kept rolling for a little while I flailed and floundered for a little bit. And it really, like, it was just such a stark contrast between how dark and depressed I got when I had to leave my job, when I broke my back, as opposed to this was a worse loss.
Yeah.
But because I had this thing, it kind of propped me up, and I had friends around me that sort of shored me up and kept me through. And so all of that is who I am, is part of me. And like right after my dad died, I've only done like, I released 327 episodes as of right now.
Okay.
328, something like that. And of those, maybe 5 are solo, are just me speaking to the mic. And one of them was right after my dad died. And I'm a mess. I'm crying on it and sad and guilty and angry and all of the things all at the same time. And I thought about taking that episode down later, because I listened later and I was like, whoa, that's raw. But then I was like, no, that's me.
Yeah.
That's me.
Was not putting out episodes ever an option for you? And I say this because, I've been unemployed for almost 2 years, and I never thought, I'm not going to do my show. I'm not going to stop writing. I'm going to keep doing, because I need something to keep me going, to prop me up, as you said. But there are times when I go, maybe it is time to take a break. But I also, it's a loaded question, because on the other side are all of the creative people I know that were like, if you ever, it's like sharks. Like, if you ever stop publishing, good luck. Yeah. You might as well just stop, right? And I get torn into what that is, because, and maybe this is a secondary question for you while I'm babbling on before I finish asking the question, is, who I am is part of hitting publish on the blog and the podcast. I might think about not wanting to do the work, but I always end up doing it. And I might think about, like, I should take a week off, but I'm always trying to be so far ahead that I can be like, I don't feel like doing anything this week. I got one in the can. I don't have to worry about it. Is that ever a consideration for you? Especially when it was, it's the darkest and you have to pass off some of the help.
Well, I have epilepsy. I'm a medical disaster. Let's just put that out there. And that is relevant in a couple of ways. And first of all, I was diagnosed about 2 years before I started my show. And so that's an odd time in your life to be diagnosed. I was like 36, 38, something like that. That's a weird time of life to be diagnosed with epilepsy. Usually it's more either as infancy or much later in life, or the result of a car accident or something like that. For me, it was just literally the middle of the night. I went into a seizure and stayed there for 5 hours.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't do normal things. And so while I felt like it was relatively well under control, I wasn't willing to lean on that and to rely on that.
Sure.
So one of the rules I set for myself when I started my show was that this has to be more fun than stress. So I'm going to make it a point of, if I don't enjoy, my first 2 or 3 episodes are very structured and thought out and planned, and I didn't like it. It wasn't fun.
Okay.
And then
more stress than fun to start out.
It was those first couple, and I was like, I don't know why people do this. And then I think it's my 4th episode, I was talking to another podcaster online, and very sort of last minute, she was like, let's do a collaboration. Like right now, let's go right now. And I was like, okay. And I had a blast where we did half of the episode on my show and half of the episode on her show. And it just worked really well. And I was like, that's what I want to do. So that means now I have to juggle things and I have to find people to come on my show. And, that's a little iffy sometimes. The day after, to back up even from that a little bit, the day after I published my first ever episode, my youngest kiddo ended up in the hospital with an infection. She had strep eye. That's a thing.
Okay.
I'm not the only one that has weird medical stuff in my house. And so, that I spent the weekend with her in the hospital, and then it took a while after that to sort of find my rhythm again. And so I was like, all right, I'm not going to stress over weekly episodes. I'm not going to do that. And a little bit later down the road, I've discovered, okay, I'm not going to worry about every week. I'm going to take breaks when I need to, and then I'll release 2 episodes back to back, Monday and Tuesday if I want to. That's fine, whatever. A little bit later, I had a collaboration where they wanted to release on a Wednesday, and I pushed really hard because the audio was not great. And so I pushed really hard to learn some editing stuff I hadn't done before. I stayed up way late, and I ended up throwing myself into a seizure. Ended up back in the ICU with that. And I was like, that is my sign from my own brain that says, don't do that. Don't push. I don't deal well with deadlines. I don't deal well with that kind of structure. So taking a break is a different thing for me. I don't have seasons. I don't have a release day of the week. When I am feeling well, when I feel well enough to sit at my computer and edit and focus, then I do. And like yesterday, I'm going to be releasing an episode later tonight. I had wanted to do it yesterday. Yesterday, I wasn't feeling well.
Okay.
And so I was like, fine, no guilt. I am not going to make this a source of stress or guilt for myself. And so when my father died, I was prepared to say, we're shelving the show. And if I can come back, fantastic. But if I can't, I can't. Like I need to, like the word can and can't have meaning.
Yeah. You need to process where you are because, you're a different person after that loss. No matter.
Well, and he died in Las Vegas. And so I live in Salem, Massachusetts. And so I had to fly across the country, and I was executor of the will, next of kin and all that. And so I had to do a lot of things I had never done before. And I was just like, the podcast cannot be my priority.
Yeah.
And while I was getting ready to go, 5 or 6 of my podcast friends stepped up and said, how can we help? And I jokingly said to one of them, I don't know, can you release an episode? And his answer was, yep. That you send me the conversation, because what I do is I do these conversations just like we're having now. We have an extemporaneous conversation most of the time. And then I let it sit for a little bit to kind of percolate. And then I do like a 3 to 5 minute intro, couple minute outro, slap those on, put music on, and release. And so I was like, I don't know, I can send you the raw conversation.
Yeah.
And you could do the intro and outro. And he was like, yeah, sure, do that. But also start a list in your group. I guarantee there's other podcasters that'll do it. And it's hard to ask for help, and it's hard to trust your baby with somebody else. But I did. And people stepped up. Probably 10 people stepped up and did it. So for like a month, I didn't do a thing for my podcast, but it kept having new episodes come out anyway.
How, in hindsight, because obviously time has passed, how do you rank look, they stepped up in a big way, and I'm not asking you to shit on them, but like compared to how you would have done the intro and the outro, because obviously you had the conversation, right? Like I do an intro and outro for this show. You and I are having this conversation, and I get, despite your circumstance, I get uneasy thinking about handing this over to someone else and being like, you do the intro and outro. So
it was tricky. So it depended. I would say I had another time where I had oral surgery, and so I couldn't speak clearly enough to do it.
Yeah.
And so people did it then for me for a shorter period of time, for like 3 or 4 episodes at a time then. So I have a total of like 15 people that have done it.
Okay.
You know, all together.
Yeah.
Of those, 14 did a better job probably than I would have done, a more conscientious job, because they knew that I was handing over my baby.
Okay.
They're all podcasters. They get it.
Yeah.
And so they thought about it carefully. They thought about what they were going to say. I think you can tell it's scripted, whereas mine, when I do it, it is not scripted.
I am scripted, but I try and write it and read it as if it's not. So, you know, to peel back the curtain, it is mostly scripted, but hopefully you don't notice it.
Yeah, I just don't. I don't, which becomes a problem then, because if somebody asks me to like re-record something, I'm like, I cannot do that. So there's the thing. And I'm actually working on a second show that'll come out probably late this year sometime, which is fully scripted, and that'll be a whole new beast. Because trying then to stay authentic to who I am and yet script, because I'm going to be hiring voice actors, and that kind of deal is going to be wild, and I'm terrified. And so we're not going to talk about that anymore.
Okay.
So 14 of the people did a very good job of recognizing this was important to me and special to me, in that I was having like literally the worst time of my adult life, and they were doing something to help, and they did a good job. One woman, and I'm not going to name her by name.
Yep.
Only because I'm not a whole entire asshole, but she, I guarantee, is not listening. She'd never apparently listened to my show before and has never listened to it since. She's not in my Facebook group. She doesn't follow me on Twitter. All of that's gone. So I have no, so, you know, if you're listening to this and you're like, oh shit, was it me? No, the answer is no. If you're listening to this, then it clearly was not you. She is a person with whom I trusted a fair amount, and I thought that we had an understanding. And then her intro was literally 30 seconds long.
Yeah.
I was like, you barely had time to say the name of the podcast in 30 seconds. And then the outro was, wasn't that interesting? Thanks for listening. And I was like, oh my God. And I remember listening to this. I was sitting in the bank waiting to close out my father's account. And it was everything I could do to be sitting in the lobby of this bank and to not just start swearing out loud, in that moment. And I felt like that probably wouldn't go over well. So I mostly restrained myself, but still I was just like, you couldn't have, like, I could have asked a random stranger on Twitter who'd never listened to my show, would you write an intro and an outro for an episode about this topic that you've never heard of before? Yeah. The topic was, it had to do with a mental disorder specifically. And so I'm like, here's the name of the mental disorder. Can you write a 2-minute intro and a 2-minute outro about it? And they would have done a better job than this woman. So 14 out of 15 is not bad for odds.
It's not. Would you be, obviously you're not handing this off to strangers, but are you now a little more, 14 out of 15 are very good odds. So you have to hand off your next episode. Are you willing to do it? Or is it
Sure.
like, okay.
I'm just smarter about who I ask now.
Okay.
I'm not going to ask somebody because they're, God, was she my friend or was she friendly? I don't know.
Okay.
Now we are no longer in contact at all.
All right.
We had literally a 5-minute spat at one point, and she was like, never talking to you again. And I said, oh, that's not how adults work in my world, but okay. And so does that make us friends or just sort of friendly, friend adjacent? I don't know what it is. Now I'd be more careful about picking and choosing and assigning as well. Like, hey, this topic would go well to this person.
Okay. Yeah.
And so that's kind of what happened. She is, I believe, I'd have to double check to be sure, but I believe that she's from the first sort of smaller group from when I had oral surgery, where there were only 4 or 5 people that did it. And I believe it's from that pack of time. And that taught me, like, you can do this and you can make it work, but you need to make sure you're careful and you trust the person you're assigning it to, and you be willing to either ask them to redo it or say, sorry, there were audio issues. I had to do it myself.
Yeah. I I've gotten lucky with, I've only lost, because we've all done this, I've only lost one episode. I have never lost an intro, but then again, like that's fully on me anyway. I have re-recorded them all the time because it's just that's on me. I'm doing the script. I'm doing the recording. If there's anything wrong with either of those, it's 100% my fault. 100%. And there have been times when I'm like an hour or two later, because I always give myself time to let it stew, right? Like this conversation, I will then put it on the side, and then I will edit it, and then I will put it aside, and then I will listen to it for show notes. That's the process. Then I will write the show notes, the intro, the outro, record, and then let it sit. Because there have been times when I'm like, that's not what that conversation was about, idiot. Like, what are you doing? And then you go, all right, well, guess we're back to drafting up something new. Like it all sounds good in the end. That's what it's supposed to sound like. But what it sounds like before it's edited, what it sounds like when it's still on the page, like we still ultimately have control before we hit publish.
Yeah, I mean, so there's lost and there's lost. Visual quotes to the audience, lost. And I hate visual quotes. So I've had one episode that was legitimately lost, that I screwed up the conversation, the Audacity crashed on me and never recovered, and I lost. And so, of course, in the way of podcasting, that was like literally the best episode that was ever recorded that no one will ever hear. Right, of course.
That's the way it works.
For my intros and outros, I try extraordinarily hard to do it in one shot, one take, because I want it to be my impression. I come from the old school of public speaking, where you tell them what you're going to tell them, then you tell them what you just told them.
I got you.
Right. And so it doesn't have to be what the episode was fully encompassed. It had to be what stood out for me, and just a couple of bullet points at the beginning and end to sort of bracket.
Drive it home.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's that. Now I've had two that were visual quotes lost.
Okay.
One of them was just not right for my show. It was not, it didn't have any, like, it's not that not all of my episodes are deep or insightful by any means. I mean, some of the time, like I had one very recently where we spent a significant amount of time talking about horse penises. So like, it's not all deep and introspective. I mean, maybe that's a deep and introspective topic for you. I don't judge.
Well, but, you know what? It's funny, but like, because of the podcast you and I run, and they are loose, you don't know until you're in it.
Like, most of the time.
I'm not, and it's the benefit of not doing an interview, right? Because an interview means I ask you questions, and if I really want to tell a story, I have to frame it in the form of a question, like I'm on Jeopardy, and that doesn't appeal to me. But bouncing concepts, ideas, and questions back and forth, that's fun. But until we're in it, I don't, it's the first question. It's my show. Like in baseball, you get the last at bat, so you get the first, whatever it is, like that's my home field advantage. Otherwise, and I've been lucky in that I haven't, but I've thought about it where it's like, because we're podcasters. We've all had phone calls that were 2 hours long that we were like, I should have recorded that. That would have been a great episode. But then you go, boy, that wasn't even a phone call I wanted to be a part of.
I can't believe I recorded that. And that's what happened with one of these. It was just not on. So it's not that every episode has insight, but this went beyond that. It felt like it was on the part of my guest. It felt deliberate.
Okay. And
so I got in touch and said, sorry, audio issues. What are you going to do? Do you want to re-record?
Yeah.
And this was right. So early on, I took almost no directive presence in my show. Like I would just literally follow the conversation wherever it went. And now I take more of a deliberate, like I ask other topics we should avoid, because I do know where the conversation's going and I can steer it. You know, if it's going too banal or it's going too intense, I can steer it back. And so this was before I did that. And so it just kind of got away from me. And so that one I lost with the visual quotes. And then another one, sometimes people come to me with really compelling ideas, which I don't need. Like literally all I need is give me a date and time and we'll record. But if you come to me with like, I want to talk about this on your show. Okay, sure, we can do that. And this person had this compelling idea. I'm trying to figure out how to frame it, but it was basically like, I want to talk about the ways in which certain specific childhood experiences have impacted my personality as an adult. And I was like, oh, interesting. Cool. I'll actually be on brand for once. What do you know? Let's try that. And then it turned into like it was 2 or 3 hours of recording with this person and them just bitching. Like that's all it was just bitching about this thing that happened to them in their childhood. But there was no sense of it going anywhere or moving beyond. And I was like, first of all, that's not fun to listen to for anybody. But secondly, that puts this person, who is also a podcaster, in a bad light.
Yeah.
And I'm aware that when people come on my show, there is a promotional value to that their listeners get to hear them in a different context than normal. And so I was like, I said to her, I'm like, why don't we re-record and kind of tighten it up, focus it in, and maybe find a little bit more of a positive direction or a negative, but some direction, because we just sat in one very unpleasant tone. And I understand you felt kind of stuck in that tone, but I'll help move you out of it. And her response was, up yours. I know what your listeners want to listen to more than you do. And I'm like, really? You with your 3 episodes compared to me with my 100 or whatever it was at the time? Like, that's fascinating. And she's also like, what if I'm still stuck there? And I'm like, I think you might be.
Yeah.
I think that is a distinct possibility.
Yeah.
And so I was like, look, the door remains open. If you want to re-record, we will, but I am not playing that episode on my show. And so those are the sort of, I've had the one truly lost one and the 2 where I was just like, eh.
Does it go on forever? Like, because I asked the question knowing full well that, I mean, I'm probably never going to run out of guests. I don't think you will either.
God, I have 20 backlogged episodes right now that I haven't run yet. So like I haven't finished them. So my process is a little different from yours in the sense that I let the conversation stew. When I have time to publish, to edit, I come down and I flip open my notebook and I kind of flip through. I don't do them chronologically. Okay. I do them in terms of what have I done recently? What do I have coming up? What do I want to edit right now? And I look over, I take some notes while I'm recording in terms of what did we talk about, ideas for episode titles, things like that. And I kind of get it in my head, like, okay, here's what we talked about. And I try to have a one shot. Here's the intro. Here's the outro. Publish, go. Don't overthink it, because when I overthink it, I stutter and I get lost and I get frustrated, and you can hear it. Like my throat closes up and I get uncomfortable. Whereas if I can stay one shot through, that's me. This is what I talk like. And this is how I think. And that's why I have taglines.
Well, it's funny because I think we're all, no matter how good you are as an editor, you want it to sound like a one shot. All the better if it is, because it's less editing. But that's the goal, right? The goal is, hey guys, welcome to the show. This is what's going on. You know, I hit my points as I wanted and envisioned them, and let's get it going. And then it happens, and you just go, hey, perfect, I'm done, moving along.
That's how I know that an episode is not fully percolated or fully cooked in my head yet.
Okay.
Is if I can't come up with the intro in like 2 takes, 3 takes, something like that, if I find myself going stop, start over more than 3 times, it's like, stop. This is not on. This is not the one. And now that I have this backlog built up again, I can afford to do that, and I can afford to move on to a different one, because there are some where I literally, all I have written down is like the name of the person, and at some point the time when one of the kids slammed the door upstairs or whatever. Like, that's all I have written down, and I'm like, if I can remember the episode without listening to it, then I'm like, cool. Otherwise, I'm going to have to do the listening and more percolating over it to find how I'm going to introduce it. And for me, what helped is I needed like I said, taglines is the closest I can come up with it. So every episode starts with, "Hey, this is Kate." It's simple and I can remember it, and that's helpful. And I talk until I reach a point where I can ask the question, are you sure you really want to know? This is Ignorance Was Bliss. So I just sort of talk openly, extemporaneously for about 2 minutes usually, until I can kind of work it around to be like, are you sure you really want to know? This is Ignorance Was Bliss. Hit the intro music. And then at the end, I try to tag back to some point that I didn't mention in the intro.
Okay.
And just sort of, hey, this is something that really stood out to me from what I just recorded. And at the end, I talk until I can say thank you to the guest. And then I thank the guest. I thank the listeners. I either say, hey, next up is this, or next up is something. I don't know yet. I'll figure it out when I sit down. Not sure. And then I used to say, for the first like 300 episodes almost, I only recently stopped. I used to say, didn't you feel better before you knew that? And I stopped doing that because the point of that line was, I can make anything sound normal. I can make a criminal or a serial killer sound normal. Didn't you feel better when they didn't seem normal?
Yeah.
Didn't you feel better before you knew that? And now some of my episodes are outright like feel good and shit. So people are like, no, I didn't feel better. I feel better after I know that. And I'm like, oh, right, I should drop that line. And so now I just kind of talk till I get to the end. And instead I say, something to the effect like, I'll be back in the next couple of days, and, please stay safe, stay sane if you're able to. And I've developed an inadvertent tagline, which is part of my disclaimer that happens at the very, very beginning before I start speaking. I've had all kinds of people, and I'll hit you up for one as well. Just read my disclaimer for me, because I feel like if it's a different voice every show, people kind of tune in differently. And I have a very loose script, but if you want to screw with it or change the wording or
Sure.
whatever, like
Yeah.
my daughter starts with "listen up, fuckers." So,
Yeah.
things like that. Like it's just whatever feels right to you. And I tell people, like, I want it to be basically, in 3 parts, right? And the first part is like, this podcast is not safe for work, small children, and houseplants. And then in the middle, I don't break privacy or confidentiality.
Okay. Sure.
As a professional. And at the end, I include the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline number. And I say the only thing out of this that is just hard and fast, I need it in the disclaimer, are the last 2 words, which are "you matter." Because I feel like people don't hear that enough. And it's simple to say. It's not difficult to pronounce, and it's not evidence of deep intimacy or vulnerability or that kind of thing. But we don't say it enough, and we don't hear it enough. And I started to hear after, so also somewhat ironically, maybe, for the first 50 some of my episodes, my dad is the one reading my disclaimer. And so I can't cope with using his voice to hear him read the suicide hotline and to hear him say that. But yet the legacy is sort of there. And I had people start to say to me after a while, there are some times, and they always say, I don't know if you get this, but as a podcaster, I'll get like, oh, I fell asleep to your show last night. Don't take that the wrong way. And I'm like, you listened. That's all I care. It's like whatever role it
100%.
serves for you.
Yeah.
And they'll also, I've had people say like, don't take this the wrong way. And I'm like, I guarantee I won't. But they're like, sometimes I listen to your show just to get to the end of the disclaimer, because sometimes I need to hear somebody tell me you matter. And sometimes that's the only time I hear it all day long. And I'm like, well, break my heart. So I've started adding it. So it's part of my disclaimer at the beginning, and I've started saying it at the very end. Because at the beginning, it was like my tagline, but I never said it because it was other people who were reading my disclaimers. And I realized, no, they should hear it from me, and you can hear it more than once. It's okay, because you might not matter to me personally, because I don't know who's listening. I don't know who's out there. But you matter to somebody. And if you don't think you matter to anybody, then hit me up. And then you will matter to me.
At the end of episode 47, the Tolkien professor suggested that you go out and make something. And I agreed with that. During this episode, Kate suggested that those creations should be more fun than stress, and I agree with that too. Now, to be sure, fun doesn't mean easy, and honestly, easy can sometimes be boring, so you'll have to judge all of that for yourself, but it is important to get started and not judge yourself or your progress against that of others. Kate and I have similar shows, but they are not the same. Often, similar and same are used interchangeably, but they shouldn't be. And while I can't fix that out in the real world, I can make it a point to say it here. Similar does not equal same. Kate and I are also similar creators. Our processes are similar, but again, we are not the same, and our processes are not the same. Similar and same are not equal. Now, this relates to you how? Well, for 2 episodes now, my guests and I have suggested you go out and do something, make something, create something of your own. Make it fun, not necessarily easy, and it can be similar to other things, but don't make it the same as something else. Make it your own. And if you are currently carbon copying something, how can you make it your own? And if you aren't making anything at all, why not? Thanks for listening to The Palmer Files, episode 48. As a reminder, all links are available in the show notes, and now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can tweet me at Agent Palmer, my guest Kate at IWB Podcast, that's IWB Podcast, and this show at The Palmer Files. IWB Podcast will also lead you to Kate's Instagram and Facebook pages, and for all of the episodes, links, and additional information, you can visit iwbpodcast.com. Email can be sent to this show at thepalmerfiles@gmail.com, and remember, your home for all things Agent Palmer is agentpalmer.com. All right, Kate, do you have one final question for me?
Sure. Let's say that you have been maybe given a grant or in other ways told that you have to create an entirely new fictional podcast. What are you writing about and why?
Ooh, an entirely new fictional podcast. There are 3 very distinct options for me. One is some kind of baseball show because write what you know. And I love baseball. So that would be, or sports in general. I mean, I'm a sucker for sports and the narratives within, and quote unquote, the game within the game that bores everybody else. Like when people just watch the Super Bowl and they're like, whatever. I'm like, yeah, but like, okay, fine, whatever. You don't want to hear the ins and outs of, the play action pass. That's cool. I get it, right? Like you don't think the pickoff move in the 5th inning was important to the 9th inning, but it was. All right, that's me. So like, I feel like I could easily do some fiction in that world. If not that, it's going to take me a while to come up with something because it's either going to be something like fantastical, like Middle-earth wizards and dragons, or I'll just try and do contemporary fiction, which of the 3 would be the hardest to write, but might be the one that gives me the most to work with because it's like here and now. I just got to make shit up. I've been so far removed. So episode 9 was my best friend Jason Zapata, and he was on again as the first episode of 4 friendship episodes. And I helped him publish a book of poetry for himself. And he has been telling me I need to get back to writing poetry. Not fiction necessarily, but back to poetry. He's also a big fan of a few short stories I wrote decades ago, and he will not shut up about them. Because I don't write that anymore, right? I'm writing my blog. I'm writing rants and opinions and thoughts and this, that, but not fiction. I wrote one piece of fiction. It showed up on this podcast. One piece of fiction I wrote in the last decade. It showed up on this podcast, and it was called Death of a Storyteller. But I don't know if it's real fiction because I based it solely on I took 3 real things, 3 pieces of nonfiction from my life and smashed them together. But I do have these friends and some family that know of what I did way back when. And they all want me to get back in, and they all tell me fiction's like riding a bike. You just gotta get on and it will flow. I don't know. I mean, I gave you the 3 most likely scenarios to happen, but the real truth of the matter is, if you ask me to write anything, even when it's my blog for a book review, hell, I finished a book last night. I still haven't written the review because I'm very much an inspired writer. I was like that way in high school, even for reports, maybe this book report or this essay got written 2 weeks ahead of time. Maybe it was the last minute. I'm always waiting for that spark. And for me, unfortunately, that spark is always the first line. Even if I want to write a post I met Kate, it was wonderful. Okay, that's what I'm writing. Except until I figure out whatever the first line is, I can't write it. That's my process. Broken as it may be, normal as it may be, whatever it is, that's my process. So, while I gave you the 3 likely candidates, until I get whatever that piece of inspiration is, that is the first line that starts me down the path of that first script, I don't know what'll come out. And it's interesting because when I do, in this even more fictional example of writing a post saying I met Kate, I don't know how that ends. I'm very much a stream of conscience writer. So it's why, even if I know what I want to say, until I get the first line, I don't know how I'll say it, and I don't know how it ends. While I have edited those posts and those writings, I'm as unlikely to know how it ends as you are when you click the link to find out. So I guess I don't know, but I will tell you, I'm not taking the money unless I only have to script it, because I have been a part of some fictional multiple voice actor podcasts, and that seems like there's not enough grant money in the world to get me to do that, aside from just writing a script and handing it in.
I mean, that's part of the grant, for sure.
Okay. Yeah, that's all I got. I can't. I'd love to tell you like, oh no, I'd write like an Oregon Trail story about going west. I don't know. I've read so many things. The only thing I can tell you for sure, and this is very off-brand for me, considering I have a website that's thematically spy-oriented and my name is spy-oriented, I'm not writing spy fiction. So I can at least tell you that. You will not read spy fiction from me.
I accept this. And I mean, we all understand, being podcasters, that if you already had that inspiration, you'd already be working on it and you wouldn't tell me. So like, I know.